Hey guys, and welcome to a new day in the Rotax 122 live. It's going to be the rebirth today, where we're going to put all the parts together. Pretty much everything is cleaned and prepared. I already have the bearings put into the cases. I do have all the stator side cleaned up here. The transmission and the shift mechanism is checked. And also the water pump is already rebuilt. I installed some new clutch plates and have a freshly honed cylinder here with the fitting piston and basically all the gaskets and stuff to make that build a success. So from the preparations I already did, maybe I'll talk you through that. I already removed and inserted all the bearings. Removing it is quite easy. You just need to heat up the case, flip it upside down, and then just use a hammer and a nut to punch them out carefully. With these blind bearings it's a bit different. Here you would need a bearing puller to kind of pull them blind bearings out. I've already heard about people kind of using grease, sticking grease in here or something like that. You can even use bread dough or like a toast bread or something like that, and really squish it in here. Take a hammer with a nut that just fits in this opening here, and then just hammer on it and it should come out. I've never used this technique before, but maybe someday I need to. So let's see. On this side it's pretty straightforward. Just drop in all the bearings, have them in a freezer, heat up the case quite a lot to make it uncomfortable to be touched, and then drop them in one by one. And then at the end put in the seal here with the lip facing outwards like that. On the other side it's a bit trickier. These all here work the same except for the main bearing. As you maybe can see here, there's a little O-ring underneath it. So actually what you're gonna do here is you're gonna put the seal in first. It's the exact same one as on this side, just of course pointing to the other side, not this side but the other way. Put that in, heat that up, make sure you don't put too much direct heat on the seal, but usually they'll hold up quite well. And then once that's done, there is a little washer with the circumference of this outer diameter here. You're going to place that in, and then you're going to drop the crank bearing in here. And mainly what it does is just it keeps the bearing from touching the seal and adjusting the play on what the crankshaft should have. So for the bearings itself, I'm only using the TN9, so that's polyamide bearings, which are actually the ones that are also coming from factory. You can use steel cages, but I had the experience from previous builds that these mainly cheaper bearings, they just don't last. I had a crank bearing failure within like 20 kilometers. I opened the engine, I replaced all the bearings again with the same bearings, put them in again, and had the same issue once more. And since then, I'm just going to use the proper bearings for that. Usually it takes a while to find them depending on where you are, but it's definitely worth, at least for the main bearing and the balancer shaft, to get the TN9 bearings, just because they have a really high frequency where they turn, and the gearbox ones are a bit less stressed. So that's my take on it. Yeah, I guess now maybe one thing I forgot, the water pump, that's also already in place. That was a bit of a struggle because you need to get this little pin out. I used some water pump pliers just to compress that on both sides, and then I used the surface where I could kind of hammer that out. Then you could slide out this piece of metal here, and inside, as you can see, there are two seals stacked on top of each other. They both go in facing up like that. So you just drop the first one into the bottom, and the second one goes just slightly touching the top. And then also important is to replace these O-rings, because if you don't, then water can creep kind of into your oil, or oil can creep into your water, whatever way around. And we don't want to have that. So yeah, that's basically pretty much it. So I would suggest I'm gonna grab the crankshaft. Maybe first I'm already gonna heat up the crank bearing a bit to make the install easier, and once that's done, we're gonna slide the crankshaft in. So yeah, I hope you're gonna enjoy the process, and I'm trying to cover everything in as much detail as possible without having to take hours on a video on how to assemble this engine. But this should be like a how-to. You can follow that, or at least that's my goal. And yeah, if there's anything you want to know, let me know in the comments, and we'll see us in a bit. Actually, I reconsidered the way I want to do it. I want to put in the gear assembly, or all the gearbox and the shift mechanism first, because then we can just have a chill time getting in our crank without having to hurry, because it then cools off. So let's do this part first, and actually start with the gearbox. So with that, you will have two shafts here. One is the input shaft, that's the one here. Basically there are some loose pieces on it here. It should have such a roller bearing underneath it. Then there is a gear with some teeth on this side, but not on the other side, that slides in on this bearing. And then you will have another gear, and basically the direction doesn't really matter, but you can kind of read the markings on it and see that this one has been used up a lot more than this side, so probably it's gonna belong to this side here. That's usually a bit of a struggle to get it on, because you need to be really precise. There we go. So that's the first one. We will have an O-ring here later on during the process, and then we have the other side, which is this one here. So that's the output shaft, where actually then the sprocket meets, and for that you just have this gear here that comes off with a washer on it, and also such kind of a roller bearing cage, and then a washer with a smaller inside diameter that will just fit on top. Usually it's easiest to leave that gear out, at least for the beginning, and start with the available gears here. And here it's really making sure that they kind of match up together. And now we have the issue of this gear here that can fall off. So we need to kind of really take our fingers and hold that while sliding it in. Before we do that, I'm gonna take some engine oil out of this bottle here, and I'm just gonna smear it on some parts of the transmission or of the gearbox. Mainly what we're gonna do these little notches here, where then actually the shift forks go in. So that's one on this one. Let's put in some oil here. I didn't fully degrease them, so I don't need to be that careful, but yeah, I find that's always helpful for assembly. Let's put some oil in here. There we go. For that I'm just using normal 10W40, which I'm also running on this engine. Usually you could use a gearbox oil, but you don't really have to bother with that since it's the same viscosity. So that's one side. Then for this side we do have two notches here, one here and one there, where the shift forks go. Just oil them up nicely. Put some more oil in between. So yeah, that's more than enough for now. Maybe spin it a couple turns. Feels good. Okay, then now let's take these shafts, put them together, and this one here goes into that bearing and this one here goes into this bearing. Sometimes it's helpful to heat them up, but I know from the past that this should slide in really easily. Just make sure to keep hold of that lowest gear. And now we got that in. Now let's, at this point I'm not exactly sure if it's all the way in, so what I'm gonna do is I'm using this gear here, put that washer on, put that ball cage on here, and then use this sprocket here with the already marked surface going down like this. Then this washer on top. And now you can already see these gears on top, they match up. So that's perfect, that's a good alignment. At this stage, of course, you cannot turn the gearbox yet because the shift forks are not in place so far. So that's also the next thing we're gonna do. We're gonna put in the shift forks. There is a small one like this and two large ones. On the left we do have the small one. There is actually no number on it. Just gonna use some oil from my hands to kind of loop that. Make sure this one points to the direction of where the shift drum will then go. And then also on this end there is a less tapered end and a more tapered end. Make sure to put the more tapered end on top. That just makes it easier when you pull in the other side of the crankcase to kind of go over it. So that's how it goes in here. And usually I'll just use these ones as kind of a tool to get in the shift fork. And now that's the part where we looped before, what we're gonna use to slide that in. Maybe lift up the gears a bit, it's a bit finicky sometimes. But eventually, without force, you'll get it in. Guess I'm still a bit tangled up, so let's try without that tool. Yes, there we go, now it sits. And now what I'm doing is I'll just insert this shaft, but I'm not gonna put it into the hole where it belongs. Just gonna set it aside for now. And now I'm gonna do the same thing for these two. And here it's like that. There's a 123 that goes on the bottom and a 113 that goes on top. Also easy to see because this one is kind of getting to the lowest point and this one is kind of somewhere in the middle. So let's take the lower one first, this one. Try to slide that in. Works like a charm. And then we take the second one. Also loop that up a bit. And we should be able to slide that in here. There we go. And now you can use this bolt here, pick them both aside, and next up we're gonna install the shift drum. Also make sure to oil all the crevices in here. And then of course also the bearings, but they're already pre-looped, so that's okay. Make sure if you put your finger on the lowest bearing and this bearing here, that it spins freely without any major interaction. And it's really a pain in the butt to get the lower bearing out because there's kind of a spring clip in it, but it doesn't have any holes to grab with some pliers. I don't know how you get them off, to be honest. So now you can just slide that in, verify that it turns freely, and now we can go ahead and install our shift forks. And to do that now, we need to kind of find the groove and match the height of the gear here, if you can see that, to fit. And once that's done, we can kind of lift it over and get it in. So that's usually a bit of a struggle, but just take your time and you'll get the hang of it. And if needed, you could also use a screwdriver carefully to kind of pry up on some gears. Or just move the shift drum in a way that's comforting you the most. And now they slid in and you can actually push this one completely down. Now let's do that for the other side. Place it here, lift the necessary gear up a bit, get it in, push that pin in, and that's already mainly what we are doing. Now you can already go ahead and play with the transmission itself. Just be aware that it might not move that freely since it's laid on the side and also has no oil in it, and these ones may pop out. But here it's a good point to verify that we have all the gears kind of running. So we have the first gear here, see that shaft move here. Then we do have neutral, this shaft doesn't move even though the input shaft spins. Then we go into second, maybe that's a wrong neutral, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. So we have all the gears working, that's confirmed. Of course now it's pretty easy to get in a wrong neutral position just because we don't have the stopper here in place, so be careful or be wary of that. Then let's use this bolt with a washer to secure the gear drum in place. It goes in with 10 Newton meters. There we go, so that's torqued. Then next up, we're going to install the balancer shaft. To do that, also lightly oil the meeting surfaces. And what I didn't tell you, what I already did, is I already looped up all the bearings in here to make sure that they spin nicely and won't overheat. So yeah, that's now done. Next up, you can also oil up the main or the crankcase gasket. I usually oil them up because it makes it easier for removing them if needed later on, so they don't stick to the case that much. This one is already pre-oiled because I already used it, and then the crank got kind of stuck, so I needed to open up the engine once more, and that's also why I'm doing this tutorial. So you can place that over here, and usually yours gonna have a little bridge going over here. I already cut that off, but yeah, you're gonna do that once you installed everything nicely. So now with that in place here, I'm going ahead and get the crank out of the freezer, heat up this bearing, and then hope to just drop the crank in, and then we're going to use the second side and meet that on here, and hopefully this goes without any major discomfort. So let's see. This is what we are looking for. Baba. Now we got the crank here, and actually our goal now is to heat up this inner race to where it just gets hot to touch, and it also will get harder to move, which means it will expand. So that makes it easier then for us to drop in the crank. Yeah, just make sure you don't heat up that outer cage too much, because it can melt, of course. It already gets hard to move by hand, so this means the inner ring is expanding, and it also gets quite hot, so that's perfect. Now let's take the crankshaft out and make sure you really place it level in there, and just make sure the contact surfaces are clean. Maybe use a little bit of oil in here to make it easier. Wow, that's cold. And then, if you're lucky enough, make sure the rod is facing upwards. You should be able to just slide that in. There we go. So that's in. Nice. Now let's get to the other side, since the crank is still cold, which will help us on this side here. And to do that here, because I already cut off this gasket, I make sure that it will just sit nicely, because we need to have a proper seal up here later on. So that's okay. And now we can basically just go ahead and do the same thing to this bearing, heat that up. And also this bearing here usually will catch up a bit, so I'll make sure to heat this one up a bit as well, but mainly the crank bearing. Okay, now they're both reasonably hot. And now once we verify that the gasket is in place well, we're just gonna take that here and make sure we're gonna slide that over carefully, and then give it the last pops carefully with your hands, and then use a rubber mallet just to verify everything is sitting nicely. Make sure your crank is spinning. Now it might have a little resistance to it, since the bearings are just really cold. And now, once that's still in place, let's take our bolts here. Actually, there should be 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 bolts. One with a little copper washer that goes here where the out says, because that's just for the coolant drainage. And then we have one here, one here, one here, one here, one here, here, one here, and the last one goes, cannot seem to find it. Where does it go? Of course, in the center. There we go. So now let's just take our wrench here and let's start at the center. Just torque it until you get some resistance to it. Okay, now we have all the bolts in place. They're not torqued yet, so we're gonna do that. Also set it to 10 Newton meters. Okay, so that's it. And now, since we heard some cracking, probably the crank will not be spinning too freely. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use a rubber mallet. Just gonna give it a tap or two, and now it already spins much better because it just alleviated that tension here on the bearing and the main, or the rod itself. So now that's spinning freely, and we can actually go ahead and assemble all the other parts on here. And before I do that, let me just take a quick break and think about what we're gonna do next. Now is a good time to kind of lube up your bearings and stuff in here. For everything which is crankcase related, I'm gonna use 2-stroke oil, because that's also gonna be the one that is going in here later on. So what we want to do is once lubricate through these holes here, and actually you can also verify that this mechanism works. So actually this one, of course, that's now too much oil, but the oil that drips out should just run through this little opening here into the crank bearing. So I'm just gonna squirt some oil in here. Of course here as well, the crank bearing. Let's also try to get that lubricated from different sides. Okay, and once that's done, just move it around a couple turns. There we go. Now you can also verify that the crank is kind of in the middle. It's not sitting on one side or the other, which looks pretty nice here. So that's good. And then as a next step, we can go ahead and put on the stator side. I'll do that first, and then I'm gonna do the clutch side. Yeah, it doesn't really matter, to be honest. So now make sure you're not going to place your wooden blocks or whatever you're using on a shaft or anything. Make sure it's just straight and nothing is touching the table. So with that done, we can go to this end here. We do have the starter clutch in here that goes like this. Let's do this first, and let's also get some grease into this bearing here. So let's just use a normal ball bearing grease. Kind of get that on top here. It's probably already way too much. And then also make sure there's a little washer in here. Make sure you don't forget that. Now we can go ahead and take our Woodruff key here, which is actually going to sit on the crankshaft itself. Oh. Crank is still cold and frozen, that's why I'm having a hard time. I hope this is enough, otherwise let's just carefully tap that in. Okay, let's see. Then next up will be adding in the magneto. So that's this assembly here, and actually it goes in like, no, not like that. Go in like this. There we go. I don't really know the torque specs, so I'm just gonna go less than 10, probably gonna go to 10, but let's take 7 for the beginning. See how that feels easily. So maybe let's go 10 anyway. Yep. Okay, now we can go ahead and slide on the rotor and make sure that this groove here is matching the woodruff key. Actually, it's easiest doing it from the top. I'll get some light for you guys. This matches up, so that's fine. Now make sure this cable here doesn't touch the rotor itself, it's routed behind it. And now we can go ahead and put the little spring clip washer on here, and then also the nut for the rotor. There's again this tool here, the ultimate Rotax 122 tool. You can just use that to hold that, put some screws in it here, and then use that to kind of hold against it. So that's the way I'm gonna do it now. It's actually 70 Newton meters. I'm gonna use the larger wrench and put it to that specification. Okay, now we got to 70. That was fairly easy with that. Now, before we put in that magneto, we actually need a feeler gauge. It's 0.5 millimeters. So that should be it. It's a bit hard to read. 0.3. Oh no, that's 0.5. Okay, so let's loosen them again. And actually they are torqued to 5 Newton meters, but I'll just hand tighten them. Okay, 0.5 is in here. On this side here, just don't forget this little piece here. You can kind of grease it a little bit, but I wouldn't use too much. And then really make sure that this gasket is sitting in nice. And as far as I know, there's no O-ring or anything that goes here. Let's just put the cap on, get the bolts in and tighten them down just by hand, and don't go crazy on them, otherwise you'll end up cracking that part. Now that's in place. It wasn't a master chest move because I now have this bulky thing to work around, but we'll figure out a way to do that. So next up will be the whole clutch side, and to start with that, let's take the water pump gear, or the water pump first. Make sure those O-rings are oiled or a bit greased up, and then you can actually just make sure it's aligning with the hole here and push that in. It should go in fairly easy. Then 8 millimeters to secure it in place. Also don't go crazy on it, otherwise you'll end up breaking that aluminum piece. Now once that's done, we can start installing the O-ring here. There's one that will be on this part here of the crankshaft. There we go. Now that's in. And now we can go ahead and use all these gears here. Now we can take this one first. Just put that over the water pump and make sure it sits in place. And then let's go ahead and install these gears here. They're made out of plastic. They're a bit brittle sometimes, so just make sure you replace them, because if you don't, and they will kind of go out, you could lose the water pump or the oil pump, and both is kind of crucial for such an engine. So to start with that, let's take one first. They're exactly the same, it's just the way how they're upside down. So this gear here would go with the larger portion on top, in like that on this side. On the other side it will be exactly the opposite, like this. So now we need to make sure to find a marking on it. If you see it, it's right here. And this marking should align with the mark on the crank itself. So that's one part. Okay, let's double check. Yes, the marking here, that works, so that's good. We can push that in. And now we do have a second one, this gear here. And this gear actually should also have a marking in here in the middle on the other side. So before we just used this side, now we're going to use that side. Here is a marking which corresponds to that marking here on the balancer shaft. And then we also do have a marking here and a marking here. So all these markings should align. So to do that, you just need to be a bit take your time, a bit patient. Maybe make sure that this one works first, and then we can go ahead and turn this wheel. It's actually really hard to see sometimes. There is the marking here, so let's spin that over. And we can now see them match up. Okay, so we do have this groove and this groove checked. There is a groove here and a groove here. And also there's a groove here and a groove here on the balancer shaft. So we are good to go. We can press that in. Now with that done, add in the gear for the oil pump, like that. And then you can add the metal gear, which will actually drive the oil and water pump, as well as the clutch itself. This one doesn't have any direction at all. So that's on here. Now we do have two circlips. One is going here. And then always with the circlips, make sure there is a flat side and there's a little rounded side. Make sure the rounded side is on top. I'll usually just place them in like that. Okay, and then I'm going to use a screwdriver, or maybe just my hands, to work them into the groove. Then you also get the feeling on if they sit right. Yes, now it's snapped in place. Then one check you can do also is kind of try to push it around They should kind of move, but not too freely, so that's good. And they now have that secured in place. Now, before we start adding the clutch pack, let's add the shift mechanism. That's two parts. One part consists of a bolt with a little washer. Then you have this shift gear stopper on it. Then you're going to find such a piece that actually holds the shift stopper. And then there is a spring that just goes in like that on here. And now the goal is to get this this piece of the spring, to get that kind of in here. So what we are going to do is we're just going to put it inside, and now carefully tighten that down. Maybe I'll get a better angle on it like that. Tighten it down bit by bit and make sure we can still move this out of the way. Already too much. You should be able to just kind of place it down here, make sure that part is still in there, and then tighten it down. Now, to verify that function, it should just, if you torque it down, it should still move freely here with some spring tension, so that's good. And we can actually lock that down with 10 Newton meters as well. So that's in place, and then the last thing, make sure you have the two washers, a thicker washer on the bottom, a thinner washer on top. And this one should actually just slide over and allow you to switch gears if you're powerful enough. You can kind of cycle through the gears, and now you can also see we are in first gear now. Once we shift to the next gear, so we would shift up. Oh, already went too far. I just wanted to show you neutral gear. There we go. So you see that little opening here, so that's a neutral gear. That's the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and there's just a neutral gear in here, which basically allows you to not have any transmission from the intake shaft to the output shaft. Now, next up, clutch packet. Really easy on this bike. These 6 bolts here, and just make sure that the top plate is not on the same stack as all the other plates, but just one to the side, and then carefully slide that in here. Now that's all spinning nice and freely, that's good. You can put your oiled gasket on here as well. Make sure it's not tangled up anywhere. Then I'll usually torque them to around 5 Newton meters. that's basically the bottom end installed. One thing is missing, which would be an O-ring here. Then that's already it. Nice. Now before we start assembling the top end, we want to make sure that this surface here is flat and even. So you can use either a razor blade or just a knife, a sharp knife or something, and then carefully run it against this gasket here. This really needs to be good, otherwise you'll end up having a leaking base gasket. So with that done, we can now kind of focus on the piston and the cylinder a bit more. Let's see what we get from that. There should be 2 rings in here, like this. And then we do have the best part of it, which is going to be the piston itself, and then the circlips and the rod. So let's check. I guess these ones are exactly the same, RSB 5400. Yeah, they're pretty much, or they're actually exactly the same. Let me take some gloves for that. Let's see if they have a bottom or top. There's an N marking here and nothing on this side, so the N marking will be on top. Let's put this ring in. Okay, this ring is in with the N on top as well. Now on 2 strokes, that's a cool feature. They usually have this little pin in here, which makes sure that if you place the piston rings the right way, they don't rotate. That's probably because of the ports and stuff, so they don't catch up. I've never seen that on 4 strokes, but I think it's a nice feature that just helps you get them in place. So yeah, I don't know why 4 strokes don't have that as well. So I guess now there are 2 options either way, or either we could mount the piston on here and then kind of do all the clips and pins and then at the end put that on top, or you could also kind of get it into the into the cylinder first, just up until here to make sure that the rings are in well, and then you can kind of slide that that piece in here and put the clips on. Because the clips are usually a pain in the butt, I'm gonna do it on here like this, and then I'm just gonna compress the rings and get the top end on it. So let's see how that works. Of course, this bearing here also likes being greased with some 2-stroke oil. Now let's put in these little circlips. So let's do this side first. Make sure they're pointing down once they're in. So I'm gonna usually start them like this, maybe a bit further. And then what I like to do is just to use a long nose plier, get the rounded side in here, and then just make sure that this doesn't spring out into your face. There we go. Now that ring's seated, we see the opening is on the bottom, not too close to this part here. Then we can also kind of grease or oil the piston itself. Okay, now let's have this arrow pointing forward and just kind of slide that piston in. Like that. And now it's best to use a towel or a rag or something just to cover all the inlets in here, in case that clip wants to jump out. Okay, that was a little bit of a struggle, but we finally got that pin or the clip in. And now we can go ahead and kind of oil up the piston. And also don't forget the piston rings. Now next up, we're gonna need a base gasket. I do have 3 different ones. One is a 0.2, a 0.3 and a 0.5. From experience, the 0.2 is usually perfect. So I'm also gonna try this one here. And we will measure that later on when setting the squish. And then we'll figure out if we made the right call. There we go. And now we make sure that the piston rings are in the right spot, where those pins are. Like that. And now we should be able to just hold them. Maybe before we do that, let's oil our cylinder up as well a bit. Now let's make sure these clip or these rings are in the exact in the right spot. And once that's confirmed, you can basically then just carefully slide the cylinder over it. There we go. Easy as that. Yep, it moves freely. That looks so yummy, I tell you. Let me take the torch here. Nice. Really nice. So now next part would be putting all the cylinder nuts on. Make sure to use a crisscross pattern by tightening them. And actually they say you should tighten them to, I don't know, 25 Newton meters or something like that. However, let me know with normal tools that kind of somebody could have in his home workshop, how could you torque this nut here to a specified torque? I mean, I don't know, maybe with a spanner or something, a torque spanner. But what I'll usually do, and funny thing is, it's even a 10 millimeter, a 11 millimeter. So what I'll usually do is I'll just use a 11 millimeter spanner and just go, yeah, ham on it, I would say. Just go as tight as you can get it with reasonable effort and without hurting you or anybody else on this planet here. So let's do that. Okay, that's good enough for me. Now, since that's done, we can actually add in an O-ring, which will be the one in here. And then also we're gonna add this cap here. Let's set the torque wrench to 20 Newton meters. And torque them. And now let's come to the interesting part. Let's check our piston squish, meaning how much place on top there is between this part here and the piston at its top position. And to do that, of course, we need to rotate the crank. So I'm going to remove this cover for now so we can spin it. And I'm going to also prepare something to check that squish, and I'm going to show you how you can do that easily. Now to check the squish, you're going to use some soldering wire. Just make sure it's really soft and not like a normal wire. And I do have a 2mm gauge here. If you can't find it, then just use a lighter to kind of make a little ball of lead on here and put that in. Actually, it's not getting squished at all, which means that this squish is either too high or I'm just not getting it right. So what we can also do is kind of stick a piece of lead on here. You need to remove the oil, of course, for that. Now let's put it down again. Okay, and now we can turn the engine. Let's do it once or twice. And once that's done, let's remove it again. Nothing squished at all, so it's over. Just lightly squished. So it's probably going to be around the 2mm mark of squish. I'd say that's not optimal, but it can be solved by grinding down this piece here or by grinding down the cylinder head. But I guess for this engine, since it was running well before, I would just leave it like that with this almost 2mm of piston squish, and maybe I'll check if there's an alternative for that. I mean, you could use a high pressure part here, which would just make sense, but this can be done once the engine is installed, so I'm not gonna bother with it now. So I feel that's okay. We took the thinnest base gasket, so nothing we can change here. So yeah, it is what it is, I guess. Next up, we're gonna add in this gasket here, and then also make sure to not forget the red O-ring that goes on top like this. Just make them hand tight, not more. Cool, once that's done, let's just put in a spark plug to not get any dirt inside of it. I'm using a BR10 iridium one. Just make sure it's a 10 if you're using a full power engine. If you're using a lower powered engine, then maybe use a 9 or an 8. But the 10 is the one that burns the coldest, so the engine really needs to heat up that everything gets burned. So this is really good for engines that are highly strung. That's what we're using for them. Now it's just a matter of adding in some accessories like the inlet manifold. When you rebuild them, make sure when you kind of hold them against the light, there shouldn't be any gaps in here appearing like that. They should be looking closed, and make sure you also put in a gasket here. Put that in like this. And that's already the fun part on that side. Great, so that's the intake side. Then we can turn the engine over to the exhaust side, and the only thing we have here would be the power valve. Here that's just the aluminum shell, and then you can either do it sequentially, or I'm just gonna add that ring on top, and then you can kind of place it in here and push it in until it sits well. Then you put in the spring like this. Now the way it goes in, if I remember right, yeah, it's actually this way. So the opening is on top, and then you can put the slider in like this with the slider like that. You just put that in like this. And now we need a gasket, and usually these suppliers, they provide different gasket kits or different gaskets for the power valve, and I'm going to show you why they're doing that. So here are our two different sets. One here is for the pneumatic valve, so that means you would have a hole in here that is used to open up a pneumatic slider. In this case we have the original exhaust control, so we can use this one here. We need to remove that piece here. And then once that's done, it just should slide in and out without touching it too much. Then let's use some oil on this one here as well. And that goes in like this. We need to remove it once more when we install this assembly. So I'm just going to put it in, and later on we will need to remove it once more, but that doesn't matter. So now we can also see the piston and the power valve in here. Oh yeah, now it already makes a seal since we have the spark plug in. I just wanted to confirm that the piston doesn't touch it. That's good. It's just a normal compression from the engine. Otherwise it's turning nice and smooth. Cool. So that's it, guys. That's the fully rebuilt Rotax 122 engine, ready to be raced and ridden. Looking forward to do that. See you guys. Thanks for joining, and have a great day.